I do want to welcome you again. It is a blessing, a privilege, and a sacred honor to be with you as you engage in this work, helping us as the church follow the way of Jesus, what I like to call the Jesus movement. Follow the way of Jesus, and through your work at the United Nations as women of faith, to help this world to become something closer to God's dream and something less like our nightmare. I thank you for that, and thank God for you, and pray God's blessing on you and on us all. And so it's a joy to welcome you. It really is. It's my first time doing it. It's a real joy. Or they like to say, it's a kick to welcome y'all. It is. And a joy to welcome not only you, but to welcome Archbishop Josiah, a friend of many years. We have known each other for quite a while now, I guess it is, Your Grace. And it's just a joy to welcome him here as well, and for us all to be together in the fellowship of Jesus. So I'm glad to be here. I hope you are.
Yes,
If you are, just turn and tell your neighbor, I'm glad to be here. Just turn and tell them. And a special thank you to Rachel and Linnea and all who have helped on this good work and will continue with you as the week goes on into Holy Week. Allow me to offer a text from Exodus, from the first chapter. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, when you act as midwives to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, she shall live. But the midwives feared God, and they did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them. And so they let the baby boys live. But the midwives feared God, and they did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. And they let the baby boys live. Now forgive me for what I'm about to say about this text, but let me give it a title. We need some lion midwives. We need some lion midwives. The nations of the earth, through the leadership of the United Nations, some years ago adopted the Millennial Development Goals, goals that were intended to greatly reduce levels of poverty on the planet in a variety of ways. And while those goals weren't 100% successful, they were significantly successful and greatly successful. There is less poverty on this planet now because people of faith and people of goodwill of all stripes and types came together to reduce poverty in the world. They didn't do everything, but we're better off than we were. And now the nations of the earth have come together again, and now they have adopted sustainable development goals, which seek by the year 2030 to eradicate poverty from the face of the earth, to do all that is possible and necessary to end and reverse climate change so that this earth on which we all live and depend will be here for generations yet unborn. And in those sustainable development goals, not only is poverty to be abolished, which is actually possible, it's not a pipe dream anymore, it can be done if, as the Bible says, y'all remember the book of Nehemiah when the people were building the wall? Nehemiah said the people can build the wall if the people have a mind to work. If the peoples of the earth have a mind to work, poverty can become history. If we will stop building implements of war and hatred and violence and use that same technological skill and ability and capacity if we will beat our swords into plowshares and our spears into pruning hooks. We'll study war no more, and no child will ever go to bed hungry again. It can be done. And so by 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals, which are a little bit complex, there's a lot of them. I tried to read them, and as I was reading, I fell asleep. But anyway, but those goals are intended to end poverty, to reverse climate change so that our world will be habitable for generations yet unborn. And then, in addition to those two, to promote equality among all people and empower those who have been disempowered. Those goals can be reached and achieved by the year 2030, especially the one about poverty. And we who follow Jesus must take our place in leading toward that. The last time I checked, in the 25th chapter of Matthew, Jesus said on Judgment Day, the Lord's not going to be particularly impressed that you're an Anglican or an Episcopal. That's nice. And it's important. I love, don't worry, I'm not changing. I love, for the camera's sake, I love being an Anglican and an Episcopalian. But on that judgment day, if you will, as the parable is trying to teach us, which is a way of God teaching us what's important to God. God cares about, did you feed me when I was hungry? Did you clothe me when I was naked? Did you visit me when I was in prison or sick and alone? In other words, did you treat each other like fellow children of God, like my human family? That's what God cares about. Everything else is secondary. Now, by 2030, that's possible. We do it as followers of Jesus in the Jesus movement. But the economists of development and those who have studied and have greater knowledge than I of these things have identified, and this was identified in the Millennium Development Goals, that the key to eradicating most poverty on the planet, aside from programs that help, and aside from economic development, which is all obvious, the key is to be found in women. That if you increase the equality of women on the planet, if you empower women economically, politically, and in reality, they will lift up themselves and their children and their families, and that in turn will lift up cultures and societies. Women, the economists tell us, are the key to making poverty history. Now that's not me making that up. That's it. I mean, Jonathan Sachs, right? I mean, we're talking economists. I mean, they have figured this out, that the key, and you all know that. I'm preaching to the choir now. That's true in the southern hemisphere and in the northern hemisphere. Women are the key to making poverty history. Because if they lift themselves up, they will lift their children, they will lift their families, they will lift the village, they will lift the community, they will lift the nation, they will lift us all. Oh, the scholars have figured it out. But long before the scholars figured it out, God had already understood that. Y'all remember the story of Exodus? Remember how the book of Genesis ends? Do you all remember how the book of Genesis ends? Remember, it's Joseph and some of the Hebrews eventually have ended up in Egypt. They are in Egypt because they were fleeing famine that was in Palestine. And they ended up in Egypt. Their brother Joseph had gotten there before them, and there's a whole story around all of that. But eventually, the whole family of Joseph, they eventually all end up in Egypt to avoid the famine, and they're able to live comfortably because their brother Joseph has become an important person in Egypt, and so they live in peace and security. Everything is wonderful. Then in the first chapter of the book of Exodus, after Joseph dies and that generation dies, there is this one sentence which is a frightening sentence. There came to the throne of Egypt a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph. And suddenly the fortunes of those who had done well in one time became fortunes of misfortune. And suddenly the Hebrews who had dwelt secure and in security, safety and security and at peace in Egypt were suddenly dispossessed persons, for the Egyptians began to fear that their numbers were growing too numerous. They began to fear that the immigration of the people, the Hebrew peoples, the roaming peoples from Palestine and the Middle East were too much, and they were beginning to fear that they needed to have more immigration laws. Help me, somebody. I'm not commenting on the news, I'm just reporting what's in the Bible. They began to fear, and so all of a sudden, instead of building bridges, they started building walls. Help me? All right? And so this Pharaoh decreed that, afraid that the Hebrews would become more numerous and that they might mount an army and become a danger, a threat to the Egyptians. And so eventually this Pharaoh made slaves out of the Hebrews, enslaved them, and in turn hoped that by this slavery he would be able to suppress them. But they kept on having babies. And they kept having baby boys. And Pharaoh said, we got to do something. So he decreed that all newborn Hebrew baby boys must be killed, lest they rise up one day and become an army to threaten Egypt. And the way to get to the baby, there are only two groups of people who knew where the babies were: their mama and the midwife. The guys didn't necessarily know. And so the soldiers would go into the villages and find the midwives and conscript the midwives to turn over the baby boys that they might be executed. But the Bible says there were two midwives, Shiphrah and Puah. The Bible says they feared the Lord. They feared God and not the pretend gods of Egypt. And because they believed and loved God even more than their own lives, they were willing to do what was necessary to save the children. And the soldiers would come up and they'd say, where are those Hebrew children? And they said, Lord, soldier, we don't know. They're lying through their teeth. We have no idea where the babies are. And then they added, and it's in the Bible, this is actually in the Bible. They explained the reason they can't find the Hebrew children. They say, every time, these Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. The Egyptian women are very much ladies when they have their babies. They're quiet, they're gentle, they have their babies on time. But the Hebrew women, they're unpredictable. You don't know when the baby's gonna come out. And before we even get there, the baby's already popped out and we can't find it. And if you look in Exodus 1, the Bible actually says that God commended them. He commended them and blessed them. Not because of the lie. Well, actually, because of the truth. The lie was not their word. The lie was that anybody was born to be a slave of anybody. The lie was that God did not create us equal. That Genesis 1 didn't say God created male and female in the image of God. He created them. It didn't say I made males with a little bit more image than females, or females with a little less image than males. It says God created male. This is in the book. I'm not making this up, right? Male and female in God's image and God's likeness. The lie is that anybody should be treated as less than anybody else. The lie is that we are not all children of the one God and creator of every one of us. The lie is that this world should be a world of injustice and wrong and vice and crime and hurt. That's the lie. The truth is, truth is, we are all the children of God. And if we are all the children of God, then we are all equal before God. And if we're all equal before God, now, if we all got the same parent, guess what that means? I'm your brother. And you're my sister. Archbishop, you're my brother. Lene and Rachel, you're my sisters. The truth is, we are family. We may be dysfunctional, but we are family. That's how God made us. And some of us are one thing and some of us are the other, but we are all the children of the one God who has created us all. That's what Jesus was teaching us. That's what the Bible was trying to get us. That was what St. Paul was talking about. He said that even in the church, we are meant to be a sign of what the entire world is to be. Remember St. Paul in Galatians 3? Oh, I'm sorry, let me get back. Remember in Galatians 3? He says, all who have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. And there is therefore no male nor female. There is no more slave or free. There is no more Jew or Greek, for all are one in Christ. Amen. Long before the economic development scholars had realized that the empowerment and equality of women is the key to the eradication of poverty and the emancipation of humanity. God understood that and blessed Shiphrah and Puah. And their work made it possible for a baby named Moses, who then set the Hebrews free. May your work, may your labor, may your time help to raise up new Moseses. Amen. And Mosinas. And set us all free. God love you. God bless you.